You're now starting the second half of the Rembrandt show. The first, when I came to see it, was one of the more revealing shows I've ever seen because it showed Rembrandt's mind at work, more or less, in a creative. So, could you tell us a little about this second show?
Yeah, the first part started in the years that he began his printmaking career, around the middle of the 1620s, when he was 20 years old. And then we thought we'd have to make a division, and we thought we'll choose the year the Night Watch was made as a sort of turning point. So in the first exhibition there were prints dated until 1642, which were his initial years. You saw a lot of prints there where he tries out things, where he tries to develop a graphic idiom as a printmaker, and then he finds that after a few years of trial and error and I think polishing copper plates and starting again, he starts to feel confident in this medium. And by the 1640s his name is also established. There is a treatise published in Frankfurt in 1640 where Rembrandt especially is mentioned for his gifts as an etcher, which was then considered to be a new technique, and he is listed with various other names. So by then he had established himself. And this Part 2 exhibition starts then in the early 40s, when he's capable of doing just about everything in print. And he starts to work on his oeuvre, as we call it now. And you see him develop all sorts of themes. So people who visited the first exhibition said, "Oh, I had Rembrandt in my head as a landscape etcher. Where are the landscapes?" Well, in that show they were at the very end. There were 3, and now when you enter the exhibition, there's 3 very varied landscapes, and further on there's a whole section which learns us, and that's a different way of approaching it than when you look at a book where all the prints are classified by subject matter. You see now in what period he was interested in what, and when he worked on what sort of themes. And by the 1640s he is able to do it all. So there are prints that are done, etchings that are done from life, direct on the plate. There are these landscapes, there are portraits, more informal ones that he does out of own initiative, and commissioned ones. And again, as you said, like in the first exhibition, we would like to give the visitor the feeling that he is able to watch these prints mature. There are initial drawings. In some cases there are oil sketches that are related to the prints, and you also see unfinished proof. The exhibition is called in Dutch Rembrandt in alle Staten, Rembrandt in all states, you might say, which has a double meaning. And we thought, well, all states is a bit much, but we'll show those states where artistically you can follow what he was heading to. So you see an early state, see him work on it a little bit, and then you see him develop into the finished image that he could distribute and put on the market. So it has that same sort of looking over the artist's shoulder feel that the first part had.
Now, many of these, as you said, he worked directly on the plate. I see that oftentimes it says etching and dry point. Could you explain the process of dry point and working directly on a plate?
Mm-hmm. Dry point was more often applied than one normally thinks. Dry point means you have a copper plate and you have an etching needle and you draw directly on the plate. Already in the 16th century, when somebody would start a print, he needed to transfer the drawing onto the plate in order that it could be engraved or etched, for that matter. And then they would trace a drawing on the copper plate and then first draw the contours on the plate in dry point, so without applying wax or using acid. But that is a tool, a helping way of getting it done quickly. What Rembrandt did is another thing. He made an etching, so he took a copper plate, applied the wax, drew in the wax with a needle, then put it in the acid, let it turn out, and then the image had bitten into the copper plate. And then he would take a proof, or he would perhaps even judge what the plate looked like and thought, well, this needs a little more accent there, or this is too gray. And then he would use the dry point, so work directly in that plate to add portions or hatching. And then he would, in this way, build up the complete image. So that is where dry point comes in. We know that once you use dry point, a plate wears pretty quickly. So in general, you can say you move the copper out of its place, and it makes a small dike, if you want to, and the ink stays there and gives a nice velvety impression. But because the copper is coming up and you pull them through a press, it wears down quite quickly. So once you use dry point in this way, you know that you are not able to make many impressions. And Rembrandt allowed that to a certain extent to make a deluxe print. So a case in point is the Three Crosses, where the first edition, the first state, comes in, say, 40 or 50 impressions. He would do them only in dry point, which gives it a beautiful burr and a very rich tonality. But he knew, and he took that into account, that then he would have to change something on the plate. But he used vellum in order to print those plates, which also gave it a sort of special quality, a little bit comparable with a deluxe edition of a book nowadays that is nicely bound, or people must have experienced that way. Then the Three Crosses is also a large print. It was almost intended only to go on the wall. There are hardly portfolios or holders or albums that could fit it in. So we have written in the catalogue that that's a print with the impact of a painting. And in Amsterdam we have quite a few impressions. And last year at some point, when we were thinking over the exhibition, we had made an installation where we put like 6 variants on a table with good clear light in August, and it looked tremendous, which made us realize that sometimes Rembrandt took into account that something, print, was not to be seen in the hand at a close distance, but from a certain distance, and it's really gives a very powerful impression. We know of a letter that Rembrandt wrote to Huygens about one of his paintings that he did for Frederik Hendrik, and then he says, please put this in a strong light, so it will work all right. So, dan zal het wel voegen. It will look good. It is to the advantage if you should show it on a bright light. And I think that here also there could have been a small slip saying, please, if you put this on the wall, make sure that the light is. And we've tried it here. We have 4 impressions here in the exhibition showing exactly what was implied. We are a bit spoiled in the Rijksmuseum and also in the British Museum in London, because we have many very fine early impressions, prints that show how Rembrandt wanted them to look, but the copper plates were printed on and on, also after his death. So if you come to a more modern collection where people can only buy what is still on the market now, you sometimes see late impressions which illuminate the process very well. In the case of the Three Crosses, there is this fine early state in the exhibition. Once he's printed 50 or 60, the plate wears down, and the impressions that you can pull are grayish and don't have this richness of tone that Rembrandt aimed for. So then he needed to do something, and once you see that in latish impressions, you start to realize that. And in the case of the Three Crosses, there is then all of a sudden this 4th state where he totally reworks the copper plate. And now it is clear that once you've seen these late impressions, you realize it needed rework. Otherwise, the market wouldn't take it anymore. So he sat himself down and worked it over completely, transforming the image to the extreme and being able to pull again an edition. Until now, a little bit of a romantic approach towards artists in the 17th century, they thought that Rembrandt was dissatisfied with how it had looked initially. So they said, well, to judge from the style in which he reworked the plate, there must at least be a period of 7 years in between. The contrary is the case. He worked on it right away. Once he had pulled the edition and felt that the plate needed repair, as you might say, or extra attention, he started to work on it again, and then you see the fourth state. And the nice thing is that in London there is a maculature of the fourth state. A maculature is once you've pulled an impression, you wanted to clean the plate, and then they would put a new sheet of paper on without applying any ink, pull that through the press again, and then you would get sometimes a very blurred, shady image of what was there, which still reads nicely. And especially Rembrandt, who put so much ink in and on the plate, when you then pull another one, you still get a nice sort of impressionist, very tonal image of the same plate. Now, the one from the British Museum in the exhibition shows that beautifully, and then you see that Rembrandt didn't clean the plate entirely or polish the plate. No, the initial image is still underneath, and you see that because all these lines go everywhere but don't tell a story anymore, but he left them on the plate. So that is one of the new insights that this exhibition brought us, that in a number of cases a sort of practical reason was there for doing something to a plate and not always an artistic consideration. Nevertheless, what Rembrandt does is so unique that you still, you remain silent when you realize with what a verve he then transformed the image. That is Rembrandt. He was one of the few who was capable of doing it that way.